Interrogator chaplains unsettle even their own battle brothers with their silent scrutiny. It says much that amongst these menacing figures, Asmodai is a grim legend. Hello there! In this video we're going to show you how to fully paint Asmodai, Master of Repentance, so that he stands out gloriously on the battlefield. The paints we'll be using are on the screen right now. These colours are perfect for getting Asmodai looking awesome and ready to take on all foes of the Imperium in the name of the Lion. We also have a list of the additional equipment we've used, but you can use whatever brushes you feel most comfortable with. If you're new to painting or want to brush up on your skills, you can check out the Citadel Colour Painting Essentials videos to learn all about our paints and painting techniques. Right, we've sprayed our model with Wraithbone spray to give us a nice light base coat to work from. Let's get painting. For our first paint, we'll be using Abaddon Black to pick out all of the power armor. We'll mix this with a bit of water to build up the coverage with multiple thin layers. It's always better to do multiple thin layers than one thick coat. Be careful around other details as we don't want to have to tidy up, especially the tunic. Okay, all of our power armor has been picked out. Now what we need to do is highlight it. We're going to use Eshin Grey next for our first edge highlight of the power armor. Thin out the paint so it runs nicely off the brush, but not too thin as we want to maintain control. Use the edge of the brush where possible, remembering to brush towards yourself to help with control. If we make a mistake or just make too thick of an edge highlight, we can always tidy back up with Abaddon Black. For our fine edge highlight, we'll use Administratum Grey. We want to paint within the lines of the first edge highlight, so we'll take our time doing this. By painting within the lines, we'll build up a nice color gradient that highlights our power armor. Try to keep the lines as thin as possible, using the edge and the tip of the brush where necessary. The grey highlight will help to make the power armor look hard and sinister, which suits the feel that we want for Asmodai. Our final step on the black power armor is to use White Scar to do a dot highlight where any edges meet. Use very light pressure when applying the dot, as well as using just the tip of the brush will also help to keep the dots small. With that completed, the black armor is now done. We're going to focus on the green cloth next, and for this we'll use Caliban Green and a small base brush to pick it out. Thin out the paint and build up the base coat with multiple layers. Be careful around any other details. With that completed, we'll now wash the entire area with Nuln Oil and remember to let it dry before doing anything else. We'll do a second coat of Nuln Oil here to just add a bit more depth to the green. We now need to re-establish the base coat with Caliban Green and a medium layer brush. We'll just pick out the raised areas, leaving the darker Nuln Oil areas in the recesses. With that done, we're now going to use Warpstone Glow and a small layer brush to pick out the raised folds and edges. Warpstone Glow is quite thin already, so just add a bit of water to help it flow off the brush nicely. Try to keep these highlights minimal as we don't want to overpower the Caliban Green base coat. We'll now just finish off the green cloth with Moot Green. Use this to paint within the lines of the Warpstone Glow highlight for both the raised folds and edge highlights. We're using a small layer brush here just to help us maintain control and painting within the lines of the previous highlight. Next up, we're going to use Wraithbone to paint over the tunic. The reason why we're doing this is that the spray has a slightly different finish to the pot, so if we make a mistake, it's much easier to tidy up as it'll have the same finish. With that complete, we're going to shade our tunic and we're going to have a bit of fun here with it. As we can see on the box art, the tunic is a bright cream color, so if we use something like Agrak's Earthshade over it, we'll lose that beautiful color. Therefore, we're going to use a 3:1 ratio of Lamium Medium to Baneblade Brown in order to make a shade consistency. Then we'll apply it into the folds and recesses of the tunic. Baneblade Brown is a very soft brown, and once it's been thinned to a shade consistency, it'll give us a nice soft shadow for our cream cloth. Do as many layers of this as you want here. We'll do 2 layers, just letting our first dry completely and then coming back to do another to build up the shadow even more. The more layers you do, the darker it will be. If we overspill anywhere, all we need to do is tidy back up with our Wraithbone base coat. Now, for a darker shade, we'll use a 3:1 ratio of Lamium Medium to Gorthor Brown. We'll look to put this into the deepest recesses and towards the bottom of the tunic. Once that is done, we'll then tidy back up with the Wraithbone base coat, looking to cover over any big spills or shading that is out of place. We'll also take this opportunity to establish some natural highlights on the raised folds. Once the shading is done, we'll just edge highlight with pallid witch flesh and a small layer brush for a nice and easy natural finish over the raised folds of the tunic. And with that completed, our bright cream cloth is done. We'll move on to doing the leather next, and for this we're using Mournfang Brown. Pick out all of the leather details and remember to thin out Mournfang Brown with a little bit of water. Be careful around the previously painted details as well. Take a bit of care when picking out the leather, as we don't want to overspill the brown onto our cream tunic. Once the base coat is established, we'll wash it with Nuln Oil. We're using a medium layer brush here to get the area done quickly. Try to avoid getting it over any of the other details. If you notice any pooling, soak it up with dry bristles. With that done, we're going to pick out all of the edges of the leather with Scrag Brown. We're using a small layer brush here for control and to help us keep the edge highlights nice and thin. With that first edge highlight done, we're now using Tau Light Ochre next to pick out the top edges and corners. Remember to keep the line small and within the previous highlight. With that done, our leather details are complete. We're moving on to the metallics next, and we're going to focus on the gold details first. We're using Retributor armor to pick out all of these areas. If you get lost as to where they are, just remember to go and check the box art. With the gold base coat established, we'll now wash it with Reikland Flesh Shade. Watch out for pooling with this step, as we don't want any stains on the larger, flatter areas or obscuring details. We now need to re-establish the base coat with Retributor armor. We're using a medium layer brush and just avoiding any of the recesses or areas where it would be naturally a bit darker. Doing this helps to bring the shine back and acts as a nice natural highlight for us. With the base coat re-established, we're going to edge highlight the gold details with Runefang Steel. Gently brush over the edges and try to keep the highlight as small as possible. This helps to sell the fact that the surfaces are hard and metallic. If we do make a mistake here, we don't need to worry, as all we have to do is just tidy back up with the base coat. With the gold details complete, we now need to pick out the silver details. For this, we're using Iron Warriors thinned with a little bit of water. As always, be careful going around the previously painted details. Okay, with that completed, we need to shade the silver details with Nuln Oil. Just look out for pooling and any overspills onto other areas. The last step on the metallics will be to edge highlight the silver details with Runefang Steel. Glide the brush along the edges to help keep them small when doing the weapon edges in particular. And with that completed, all of our metallics are finished. What we'll do now is just change our water pot, as we don't want to get any metallic flakes into the rest of our paints. We're using Screamer Pink to pick out all of the Purity Seal wax. Once that's done, we're washing over the Screamer Pink with Nuln Oil and a medium layer brush. It's time for a little highlight layer, and for this we're using Pink Horror to pick out the raised areas of the wax, leaving the previous steps in the recesses. We'll be using a small layer brush for this. Finally, we're going to do a dot highlight of Kislev flesh on the very raised areas using a small layer brush to help us keep the dot nice and small. Try to use just the tip of your brush to maintain good control. With that done, our wax is finished. Now to do the parchment. For the parchment, we're using White Scar and a small layer brush here to base it. This will help to make the parchment stand out against the rest of the model nicely. We'll need a few layers of this to get good coverage, so just remember that we need to let the first layer dry completely before doing another one. This will avoid any unwanted texturing. Okay, we're now going to thin Space Wolves Grey to a 1:3 ratio with contrast medium and wash it over the parchment to give it some depth. We're thinning it here as we don't want it to be too strong, but rather give a hint of shadow. For this, we'll be using a medium layer brush. With that complete, all that's left to do on the parchment is edge highlight it, and we're using White Scar to do it. To apply it, we'll be using a small layer brush. This will help define the folds and edges of the parchment. Our purity seals are done and stand out really nicely on our model. Okay, time to pick out the lenses, and we're going to use White Scar for this as well. When basing them, we're using a small layer brush to help us be neat when applying it, as there are a lot of painted details around the lenses. Once our base has dried, we're going to do a 3:1 mix of contrast medium to Blood Angel's red and apply it over the lenses and power nodes on his weapons. We're also using pure Blood Angel's red to pick out the red wires on the backpack and then the lowest section of the power nodes on his weapons. Once that's done, our last thing to do is a little dot highlight of white scar on the top left corner of the power nodes just to finish them off. Next up is the base detail, and for this we're using Eshin Grey and picking out the rubble that Asmodai is stood on. Just be careful going around the previously painted details here. With that done, we're now going to wash it with Nuln Oil. Once we've let that dry, we're now going to dry brush Administratum Grey over it using an STC small dry brush. Take care around other details and keep the dry brush nice and light. If you want to know more about dry brushing, you can always go and check out our Painting Essentials videos all about it. With that done, all that's left to do is paint the sculpted dirt. For the sculpted dirt details, we'll be using Mournfang Brown thinned with a little bit of water and a small base brush to help us be neat when applying it. Once that's done, we'll now wash it with Nuln Oil. When the wash is dry, our final step is to dry brush highlight it with Tau Light Ochre using an STC small dry brush. And there we go, Asmodai, Master of Repentance, is complete and ready to hunt down the fallen wherever they may be hiding. We've based him to match the rest of our army. If you want to know more about basing, you can check out our Painting Essentials videos all about it. For more tutorials, tips and tricks, check out our videos on the Warhammer YouTube channel, or you can head down to your local Warhammer store where our amazing staff will be more than happy to help. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this video and we'll see you again soon. Bye bye!